Welcome back, my friends. Today, we are going to listen to the powerful story of how World War II changed the world forever. This was not only a war between armies, it was a war that changed countries, families, technology, politics, borders, and the way people understood freedom, fear, and power. Even today, many parts of our modern world still carry the shadow of that war. To understand why World War II became so important, we first need to understand the world before it began, before World War II. The world was still living with the memory of World War I. That earlier war had ended in 1918, but peace did not feel complete. Many countries were tired, poor, and full of grief. Millions of people had died. Cities and villages had been damaged. Families had lost fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. The war was over, but the pain remained. In Europe, many people hoped that such a terrible conflict would never happen again. They wanted peace, stability, and a future without another great war. But under the surface, anger and fear were still growing. After World War I, Germany was punished heavily. The Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to accept blame for the war, pay large amounts of money, and reduce its military power. Many Germans felt humiliated. They believed their country had been treated unfairly. The economy became weak, and life became difficult for ordinary people. Imagine a family trying to buy bread, but prices keep rising. Imagine workers losing jobs, shops closing, and people feeling that their future has been stolen. In moments like this, anger can become dangerous. People begin to search for someone to blame. They begin to listen to leaders who promise simple answers to painful problems. At the same time, the world economy collapsed during the Great Depression. This crisis began in 1929 and spread across many countries. Businesses failed, banks closed, people lost their savings, millions lost their jobs. Streets that once felt busy became quiet. Factories slowed down. Families waited in long lines for food. The sound of hope became weaker. When people are hungry, afraid, and uncertain, they often become more open to extreme ideas. They want a strong leader. They want order. They want someone to say, "I can fix everything." In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party used this anger and fear. Hitler promised to make Germany powerful again. He blamed others for Germany's problems. He used emotional speeches, propaganda, and fear to gain support. He told people that Germany had been betrayed. He promised national pride, jobs, military strength, and a new future. Many people believed him because they were desperate, but behind these promises was a dangerous ideology built on hatred, racism, control, and violence. Germany was not the only country moving toward aggression. In Italy, Benito Mussolini wanted to rebuild national greatness through military power and dictatorship. In Japan, military leaders wanted more land, more resources, and greater influence in Asia. These countries believed they deserved more power. They did not want to accept the world as it was. They wanted to change it by force. This created a dangerous situation. Several nations were becoming more aggressive at the same time. While many other countries were still trying to avoid another war, Britain and France remembered the horror of World War I. Their leaders did not want to fight again. Many people in those countries supported peace at almost any cost. This helped create a policy called appeasement. Appeasement meant giving an aggressive country some of what it wanted, hoping this would prevent a larger conflict. At first, some leaders believed this was wise. They hoped that if Hitler received certain territories, he would stop. But dictators often see weakness when others offer compromise instead of becoming satisfied. Hitler became bolder. In the 1930s, Germany began rebuilding its military. This violated earlier agreements. But the response from other countries was limited. Then Germany moved troops into the Rhineland. Later, Germany took Austria. Then Hitler demanded land from Czechoslovakia. Each step made Germany stronger, and each weak response made war more likely. The world was watching a fire grow, but many leaders still hoped it would burn out by itself. Meanwhile, ordinary people did not always understand how close the world was to disaster. Life continued in many places. Children went to school. Families ate dinner. Workers went to factories. People listened to the radio, read newspapers, and talked about politics, money, and daily worries. But news from Europe and Asia grew darker. The sound of marching boots, military parades, and angry speeches became harder to ignore. The world was changing, and many people could feel that something terrible was coming. One of the most important lessons from this period is that great wars do not usually begin in one day. They grow slowly. They grow through fear, anger, broken promises, economic pain, weak decisions, and leaders who use hatred to gain power. World War II did not suddenly appear from nowhere. It came from many problems that were left unresolved after World War I. It came from the suffering of ordinary people. It came from political failure. It came from ambition. It came from the dangerous belief that one nation had the right to dominate others. By the late 1930s, the world was standing near the edge. Germany had become more powerful. Italy was aggressive. Japan was expanding in Asia. Britain and France were worried, but still hoped to avoid war. The United States was cautious and wanted to stay away from another European conflict. Many people still hoped peace could survive. But hope alone was not enough. Then, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This was the moment when the fragile peace finally broke. Britain and France declared war on Germany. The conflict that many people had feared had now begun. At first, some believed it might be limited, but soon it would spread across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the oceans. It would become the largest and most destructive war in human history, and the world would never be the same again. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the world crossed a line it could not easily cross back. For years, many leaders had tried to avoid another major war. They had watched Germany grow stronger. They had watched Hitler take more territory. They had hoped that each new demand would be the last one, but the invasion of Poland showed that Hitler did not want only small changes. He wanted conquest. He wanted power. He wanted to reshape Europe by force. Britain and France could no longer remain silent. So they declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The attack on Poland shocked the world because it was fast, brutal, and modern. Germany used a style of warfare often called blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. The idea was simple but terrifying. Attack quickly. Use airplanes, tanks, and soldiers together. Break the enemy lines before they can fully react. Move so fast that confusion spreads everywhere. For ordinary people in Poland, this was not a theory written in a military book. It was the sound of engines in the sky, roads filled with soldiers, families running from their homes, and cities suddenly under attack. The war was not far away anymore. It was in the streets. Poland fought bravely. But it was trapped between powerful enemies. Germany attacked from the west, and the Soviet Union later moved in from the east. Poland was divided, and its people faced occupation, fear, and violence. The fall of Poland sent a message to Europe. This war would not be like old battles, fought slowly across fixed lines. This war would move quickly. It would use machines, air power, propaganda, and terror. It would not only target soldiers, it would also reach civilians. After Poland fell, there was a strange period in Western Europe. Britain and France were officially at war with Germany. But for a short time, there was little major fighting in the West. Some people called this the phony war because it felt unreal. Soldiers waited. Families listened to the radio. Newspapers printed warnings. People prepared for air raids. But the full storm had not yet arrived. It was like standing under a dark sky, hearing thunder in the distance, and knowing the rain would come soon. Then Germany moved again. In 1940, German forces attacked Denmark and Norway. Soon after, they attacked Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The speed of the German advance stunned the world. France had been considered one of Europe's strongest military powers. Many people believed it could resist Germany for a long time, but German forces moved through unexpected routes and used their speed to create panic. The old plans did not work. The war was changing faster than leaders could respond. One of the most dramatic moments came at Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of British and Allied soldiers were trapped near the coast of France. The situation looked desperate. If these soldiers were captured, Britain might lose much of its army. But then came a remarkable rescue. Military ships, fishing boats, civilian boats, and many small vessels crossed the water to bring soldiers home. The sea was dangerous. The sky was threatened by enemy aircraft. The beaches were full of tired men waiting for rescue. Dunkirk was not a victory in the usual sense, because the Allies were retreating, but it became a symbol of survival. It showed that even in disaster, hope could still move across the water. Soon after, France fell. German forces entered Paris. For many people, this was almost impossible to believe. Paris was one of the great cultural capitals of the world. It was a city of art, music, café, books, and memory. Now German soldiers marched through its streets. The fall of France made Europe feel darker than ever. Nazi Germany controlled or influenced much of the continent. Many countries were occupied. Many people lived under fear. Resistance movements began to form. But they had to work in secret. Ordinary life became dangerous. A wrong word, a hidden radio, or a small act of help could bring serious punishment. After France fell, Britain stood almost alone in Western Europe. Hitler expected Britain to make peace. But Britain refused. Under Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Britain prepared to fight on. This led to the Battle of Britain, one of the most important air battles in history. German planes attacked British airfields, cities, ports, and factories. British pilots fought in the skies. People on the ground listened for sirens, ran to shelters, and waited through nights of bombing. The sound of aircraft overhead became part of daily fear. London and other cities suffered heavy attacks during the Blitz. Buildings burned, streets filled with dust. Families slept underground. But Britain did not surrender. This period showed that World War II was becoming more than a military conflict. It was becoming a test of entire societies. Soldiers fought on land, sea, and air. But civilians also carried the weight of war. Children were sent away from cities for safety. Families used blackout curtains at night so enemy planes could not see lights below. People saved food, reused materials, and listened carefully to news reports. War entered kitchens, schools, train stations, churches, and bedrooms. It changed the rhythm of every day. Europe had fallen into darkness. But the story was not finished. Germany seemed almost unstoppable, yet it had not defeated Britain. Across the Atlantic, the United States was watching. In the East, the Soviet Union remained connected to Germany by a temporary agreement, but that would soon break. In Asia, Japan was expanding its war. The conflict was growing larger, step by step, and soon it would become truly global. The second lesson from World War II is this: when aggressive power is not stopped early, it often grows stronger. By the time the world fully understood the danger, many countries had already fallen. But even in the darkest moments, resistance did not disappear. In occupied cities, on dangerous beaches, in the skies above Britain, and inside ordinary homes, people still made choices. Some chose fear, some chose silence, some chose survival, and some chose to stand against the darkness. By the middle of the war, World War II was no longer only a European conflict. It had become a global war. At first, many people saw the fighting mainly through the fall of Poland, the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, and the fear spreading across Europe. But the world was much larger than Europe, and the ambitions of powerful nations were reaching far beyond one continent. Germany wanted control in Europe. Italy wanted influence around the Mediterranean and Africa. Japan wanted more land, more resources, and greater power in Asia and the Pacific. Step by step, the war moved across borders, oceans, deserts, islands, and skies. One of the biggest turning points came in June 1941. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union, this attack was called Operation Barbarossa. Until then, Germany and the Soviet Union had a temporary agreement, but Hitler broke it. He sent millions of soldiers east in one of the largest invasions in history. At first, German forces moved quickly. They crossed huge distances. Soviet cities and villages faced terrible destruction. Soldiers and civilians were caught in a war of extreme violence. The land was wide, the roads were long, and the weather would soon become a powerful enemy. The invasion of the Soviet Union changed the war because Germany had opened a massive new front. Now the war would be fought across the vast spaces of Eastern Europe, where the cost in human life would become almost unimaginable. For ordinary people in the Soviet Union, the war was not only about armies, it was about survival. Families fled from their homes. Factories moved east. Cities prepared for sieges. People worked in freezing conditions. The sound of artillery, marching soldiers, and distant explosions became part of daily life. In places like Leningrad and Stalingrad, civilians and soldiers endured hunger, cold, fear, and destruction. The war in the East became one of the most brutal parts of World War II. It showed that this conflict was not simply about territory. It was also about ideology, survival, and the future of entire nations. While the war in Europe grew larger, another storm was building in Asia and the Pacific. Japan had already been expanding for years. It wanted resources such as oil, rubber, and minerals. It wanted to dominate parts of Asia and build a larger empire. Many countries and territories in the region felt the pressure of Japanese military power. China had already suffered greatly from war with Japan before the wider global conflict reached its peak. Cities were attacked. Civilians suffered, and millions lived under fear. The war in Asia reminded the world that World War II was not only a Western story, it was also an Asian story, a Pacific story, and a human story that touched many peoples. Then came December 7th, 1941. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, a major American naval base in Hawaii. The attack shocked the United States. Ships burned. Smoke rose into the sky. Sailors ran through chaos. The sound of explosions filled the harbor. For many Americans, the war had suddenly arrived in a direct and painful way. Before Pearl Harbor, many people in the United States wanted to avoid joining another major war. After Pearl Harbor, that changed quickly. The United States declared war on Japan. Soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. Now America was fully inside World War II. The entry of the United States changed the balance of the war. America had enormous industrial power. Its factories could produce ships, tanks, planes, weapons, trucks, and supplies on a huge scale. The country also had millions of people who could serve in the military or work in war industries. This did not mean victory would come quickly. The war would still be long and painful. But the Allies now had a powerful new force on their side. Britain, the Soviet Union, the United States, China, and many other Allied nations were now connected in a global struggle against the Axis powers. The war spread across the oceans. In the Atlantic, German submarines attacked ships carrying food, fuel, weapons, and supplies to Britain and other Allied forces. This became known as the Battle of the Atlantic. It was not always as visible as famous land battles, but it was extremely important. If the Allies could not move supplies across the ocean, they could not continue the fight effectively. Sailors faced cold water, dark nights, and the constant danger of sudden attack. A ship could seem safe one moment and be sinking the next. The ocean itself became a battlefield. In North Africa, armies fought across deserts. The landscape was harsh and open. Sand moved with the wind. Heat could be intense during the day, and nights could feel cold. Tanks, trucks, and soldiers crossed long distances through difficult conditions. Control of North Africa mattered because it connected to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and important supply routes. Battles in this region involved British, German, Italian, American, and many other forces. The war was becoming a chain of connected struggles. A battle in one place could affect supplies, strategy, and morale in another place far away. In the Pacific, the war looked very different from the war in Europe. It was fought across islands, seas, jungles, and beaches. The distances were enormous. Soldiers could be sent to small islands that most people had never heard of before. But those islands could become strategically important. Battles in the Pacific were often fierce and costly. The environment itself was dangerous: heat, rain, disease, insects, thick forests, and rough seas. For many soldiers, the Pacific War felt like a world of isolation. A small island could feel like the entire universe when fighting began. As the war spread, civilians everywhere became part of the conflict. In cities, people faced bombing. In occupied countries, people faced control, hunger, forced labor, and fear. In many places, families were separated. Letters became precious. News from the front could bring hope or heartbreak. Women entered factories in large numbers to build weapons and supplies. Farmers worked to feed nations at war. Children learned to live with rationing, air raid warnings, and uncertainty. World War II became total war, meaning that entire societies were involved, not only soldiers. This global nature is one reason World War II changed the world forever. It connected the fate of people who had never met. A factory worker in Canada or the United States could produce equipment used in Europe. A sailor in the Atlantic could help keep Britain supplied. A soldier in North Africa could affect the future of the Mediterranean. A battle in the Pacific could change the balance of power in Asia. The war made the world feel smaller because every front was connected. The third lesson from World War II is this: when a war becomes global, no country remains untouched forever. Even people far from the front lines can feel its effects through food, work, fear, news, money, and loss. World War II spread because powerful nations wanted to control more than their own borders. But once the fire spread, it became difficult for anyone to stand outside it. The war had now become a struggle across continents, and the outcome would decide not only who controlled territory, but what kind of world would come after the fighting ended. World War II was fought by armies, generals, pilots, sailors, and leaders, but it was also lived by ordinary people. This is one reason the war changed the world so deeply. It did not stay only on battlefields. It entered homes, schools, factories, farms, churches, hospitals, train station, and city streets. Millions of people who never carried a weapon still felt the weight of the war every day. They faced rationing, fear, separation, bombing, occupation, hunger, and grief. For them, World War II was not a story in a history book. It was the sound of sirens at night, the taste of simple meals, the silence after bad news, and the hope that someone they loved might come home. In many countries, daily life changed completely. Food, fuel, clothing, and other goods were limited because so many resources were needed for the war. Families learned to use less. They repaired old clothes. They saved small items. They planted gardens. They waited in lines. In cities under attack, people used blackout curtains so enemy planes could not see lights from the air. When sirens sounded, families ran to shelters. Children were sometimes sent away from big cities to safer places in the countryside. Imagine a young child standing at a train station with a small bag, saying goodbye to parents without knowing when they would meet again. That kind of pain became part of the war for many families. Women also played a major role. As millions of men went to fight, women entered factories, farms, offices, hospitals, and military support roles in huge numbers. They built planes, tanks, weapons, ships, and supplies. They worked long hours in loud factories where machines shook the floor and metal echoed through the air. Some served as nurses, drivers, code breakers, radio operators, and resistance helpers. Their work helped keep entire nations alive during the conflict. After the war, the world could not forget what women had done. This changed ideas about work, responsibility, and the role of women in modern society. In occupied countries, life became even more dangerous. Nazi Germany controlled many parts of Europe, and people lived under surveillance, fear, and strict rules. Some people tried to survive quietly. Some collaborated with the occupiers. Others joined resistance movements. Resistance could take many forms. Some people printed secret newspapers. Some passed messages. Some hid people in danger. Some damaged railways or equipment. Some gathered information for the Allies. These actions were risky. A small mistake could lead to arrest, prison, or death. But resistance showed that even when a country was occupied, the human spirit was not always defeated. One of the darkest parts of World War II was the Holocaust. Nazi Germany murdered 6 million Jewish people, along with many others targeted by Nazi ideology, including Roma people, disabled people, political prisoners, and other groups. This was not a normal result of war. It was organized hatred, carried out through laws, propaganda, ghettos, mass shootings, forced labor, deportation, and death camps. This part of history is painful, but it must be remembered. It shows how dangerous racism, dehumanization, and unchecked state power can become. After the war, the world would be forced to face a terrible question. How could human beings do this to other human beings while ordinary people suffered? The military direction of the war slowly began to change. The Axis powers had seemed extremely strong in the early years, but they could not win everywhere forever. The Allies began to find turning points. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway in 1942 became a major moment. The United States Navy stopped Japanese expansion and damaged Japan's ability to continue attacking at the same strength. It did not end the Pacific War, but it changed the balance. The ocean was still dangerous, but Japan no longer moved forward with the same confidence. In North Africa, the Battle of El Alamein became another important turning point. British and Allied forces stopped German and Italian forces from advancing further toward Egypt and the Suez Canal. Control of this region mattered because it affected oil, shipping routes, and access between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Desert War had been long and difficult, but this victory helped the Allies gain momentum. It showed that Axis forces could be stopped. The greatest turning point in Europe came in the east, at Stalingrad. The battle was brutal, long, and devastating. German forces tried to take the city, but Soviet soldiers and civilians resisted with enormous determination. The fighting moved through streets, buildings, factories, and ruins. Winter made everything worse. Hunger, cold, fear, and exhaustion filled the city. When the battle finally ended in 1943, Germany had suffered a massive defeat. Stalingrad changed the war because it showed that Nazi Germany could be pushed back. From that point, the Soviet Union began moving westward, slowly and painfully, toward Germany. These turning points did not make victory easy. The war still continued for years. Many people still died. Many cities were still destroyed. Many families still waited for news. But the direction of the war was beginning to shift. The Allies were no longer only surviving. They were preparing to push back on several fronts: industry, strategy, sacrifice, and resistance were beginning to combine. The fourth lesson from World War II is this: history is not changed only by famous leaders. It is also changed by ordinary people who endure, work, resist, protect, and continue. When life becomes difficult, a factory worker, a nurse, a codebreaker, a farmer, a child, a sailor, a resistance fighter, and a frightened family in a shelter all became part of the same global story. World War II changed the world because it forced entire societies to decide what they would stand for, what they would sacrifice, and what kind of future they wanted to survive for. By 1944, the direction of World War II had changed. The Axis powers were no longer moving forward with the same force as before. Germany was being pushed back from the east by the Soviet Union. The Allies were fighting through Italy. In the Pacific, the United States and its allies were moving from island to island, slowly forcing Japan back. But the war was not over. In fact, some of the hardest fighting still remained. A wounded empire can still be dangerous, and the final road to victory would be long, painful, and costly. One of the most important moments came on June 6, 1944. This day became known as D-Day. Allied forces crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches of Normandy in France. It was one of the largest military operations in history. Soldiers moved through rough water, planes flew overhead, ships filled the sea. The beaches were covered with danger, noise, smoke, and fear. Many soldiers were very young. Some had never been in battle before. As they stepped into the water and ran toward the shore, they knew they might not survive the day. But they also knew that if the Allies could break through, Western Europe could begin to be freed from Nazi control. The landings were difficult, but they succeeded. From Normandy, Allied forces pushed deeper into France. Paris was liberated. People came into the streets with flags, tears, and hope. But liberation did not mean the war was suddenly easy. German forces continued to resist. Cities and villages still suffered. Soldiers still fought through cold weather. Broken roads, forests, towns, and rivers. The war in Europe was moving toward its final chapter. But every mile still had a price. In the east, the Soviet Union continued pushing toward Germany. The fighting was intense and destructive. Cities were turned into ruins. Soldiers and civilians lived through hunger, fear, revenge, and exhaustion. By 1945, Allied forces from the west and Soviet forces from the east were closing in on Germany. Adolf Hitler's dream of domination had become a disaster for Europe and for Germany itself. Berlin was surrounded. The Nazi regime was collapsing. In April 1945, Hitler died by suicide. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over. People celebrated in the streets. Bells rang. Crowds cheered. Strangers hugged each other. Families cried with relief. This day became known as Victory in Europe Day. But the joy was mixed with grief. So many people were dead. So many homes were destroyed. So many cities were damaged. So many families would never be complete again. Victory did not erase the pain. It only ended the fighting in Europe. The war in the Pacific continued. Japan refused to surrender, and the battles became increasingly deadly. The United States and its allies moved closer to Japan through difficult island campaigns. Then, in August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was terrible. Entire areas were burned and shattered. Many civilians died immediately, and many more suffered later from injuries and radiation. These bombings remain among the most painful and debated events in modern history. Soon after, Japan surrendered. World War II was over. But when the war ended, the world did not return to what it had been before. It had changed completely. Europe was damaged. Millions of people were displaced. Borders shifted. Empires weakened. The United States and the Soviet Union became the two most powerful nations in the world. Their relationship would soon turn into the Cold War, a long period of tension, fear, competition, spies, weapons, and nuclear danger. World War II had ended, but a new global rivalry was beginning. The war also led to the creation of the United Nations. After such destruction, many leaders wanted a new international organization that could help prevent another world war. The United Nations was created to encourage dialogue, cooperation, peacekeeping, and human rights. It could not solve every problem, but its creation showed that the world understood something important. Nations could no longer pretend that one country's violence affected only one country. In a connected world, war could spread across continents. World War II also changed the meaning of human rights. After the Holocaust and other wartime crimes became fully known, the world had to face the horror of what hatred and state power could do. This helped lead to stronger international discussions about genocide, war crimes, refugees, and the rights of every human being. The phrase, "never again," became more than a slogan. It became a warning. It reminded future generations that civilization can collapse when people accept dehumanization, propaganda, and cruelty. Technology also changed. The war accelerated advances in aviation, medicine, radar, code breaking, rockets, computers, and nuclear science. Some of these advances later helped civilian life. Others created new dangers. The atomic bomb showed that humans now had the power to destroy cities in a single moment. From that point on, modern history would always live with the shadow of nuclear weapons. World War II also weakened old colonial empires. Many countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East began pushing harder for independence after the war. People who had fought, worked, and sacrificed during the conflict began asking why they should remain under foreign rule. Over the next decades, the map of the world changed as many new nations became independent. This is why World War II changed the world forever. It reshaped power. It changed borders. It changed technology. It changed ideas about human rights. It changed the role of governments, women, workers, soldiers, and civilians. It showed both the worst and the strongest parts of humanity, hatred and courage, destruction and sacrifice, cruelty and resistance. The final lesson from World War II is simple but serious. Peace is not automatic. Freedom is not guaranteed. A better world must be protected by memory, responsibility, and courage. When people forget the cost of hatred, the danger can return. But when people remember, learn, and choose wisely, history can become a warning instead of a repeated tragedy. Thank you for listening to this story. Now, write one simple sentence in the comments. You can write, "I learned that World War II changed the modern world forever." Keep listening, keep learning, and I will see you in the next story.